In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Last night was the first of the Harris versus Trump presidential election debates. Probably the last, actually. I don't think Donald Trump wants to do another one. And it didn't disappoint. I'm Michael Walker. You're watching Novara Live, and I'm joined by Helena, a.k.a. No Justice MTG, to talk you through, a completely wild debate last night. I have to say, I sort of enjoyed it in a strange way. Obviously, Donald Trump definitely could still win the presidency. So on one level, it's a little bit scary, but you kind of also have to find it surreally entertaining. Have you been entertained, Helena?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's one thing, people like Trump and Liz Truss, sure, they may be dangerous in terms of statecraft, but they're peak memes. You cannot deny these people are peak memes.
Donald Trump was all his references were very online. We will take you through all of it. Also coming up tonight, the government have today introduced their renters' rights bill. So we could finally be getting rid of no-fault evictions. We've been waiting a number of years for that. It seems to be actually happening now. And we'll look at the latest updates from Israel's war on Gaza. The presidential election in the United States is a high-stakes contest between two very different candidates, and the polls suggest it could not be closer. And that meant last night's first and possibly only debate between Trump and Harris was a massive moment. And it was a big deal, especially for Democratic nominee Kamala Harris, who had until last night largely avoided unscripted appearances in the public eye. She didn't want you to know what she thought when she wasn't reading a teleprompter. That all changed last night, at least for 2 hours. And the consensus seems to be she did okay.
Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess. What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook, a bunch of lies, grievances, and name-calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. I believe very strongly that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together, knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us. And I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans.
So as I say, Kamala Harris, relatively coherent. She's trying to bring up Project 2025 a lot. That's this right-wing campaign or right-wing plan by a sort of Trump-aligned think tank that would completely strip back the state in a manner which is very unpopular in America, as it is pretty much everywhere. Unfortunately for Harris, one of the things going into this debate is that people think she is more ideologically extreme than Donald Trump. So one of her tasks, I suppose, in this debate was to try and shift that narrative that Donald Trump is the extremist and she is the moderate. Trump didn't help himself on that front. He was predictably unhinged throughout the debate and had to be fact-checked on a number of issues, including abortion.
They have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
Loads of right-wingers on the internet were fuming at the sort of live fact-checking because they're saying that they're fact-checking Donald Trump so much more than they are fact-checking Kamala Harris. Now, whatever sort of criticisms you might have of Kamala Harris, Donald Trump does lie more, which means that the fact-checkers would sort of by definition have to intervene more there. I mean, if he wanted to defend him there, I'm not sure he did say that it was legal to execute babies anywhere, but he was saying that a former mayor of or a former governor of a state wanted to. And anyway, completely unhinged. And I suppose Harris's real skill in this debate, where she really thrived, was that she successfully managed to get under Donald Trump's skin. And she chose, I think, a topic which he is most sensitive about, his rallies.
I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. And it does, it really adds to it. I suppose maybe less so for an American audience, but for a British audience, the fact that he's talking about Springfield, which is where The Simpsons is set. I mean, it did all seem very entertaining. And I suppose that was also an example of the effectiveness of Kamala Harris in that debate, because what set him off on that rant, which ended in that sort of bizarre outburst, was him sort of getting under his skin about his rallies. He sort of starts off, no, people don't leave my rallies. By the way, World War III is coming. Also, they're eating your dogs. And that was the standout, memorable moment from that debate. Obviously, very hilarious to see a sort of potential president be sort of screaming that kind of thing on stage. I mean, there is also a serious element here, because Haitians in America are just getting, I mean, just smeared to a bizarre extent, mainly by sort of nutcases on right-wing Twitter who have just made up this lie that Haitians in Ohio are eating pets. There's been literally no evidence for this whatsoever anywhere, but it became this right-wing meme. J.D. Vance, so the vice president nominee with Trump, then sort of started sharing it, even though he admitted there wasn't any evidence, and now Donald Trump has said it from the debate stage. So I think it's a flop for the Trump campaign that he said that. At the same time, sort of having these Haitian migrants having this sort of smear thrown at them on the national, probably one of the most viewed television shows of the year, is not necessarily purely a laughing matter. That claim about migrants eating pets was another of Trump's claims that, live on the show, needed to be fact-checked.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from television.
But the people on television saying their
manager.
Dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme.
Really good response. Talk about extreme sort of chuckling. I really like that. I mean, there's two elements of that, right? Which is Donald Trump sort of saying, I saw this guy on TV saying they ate my dog, right? That would already be, appalling enough. You just heard a bit of hearsay and then you're randomly sort of spreading it in a presidential debate on national television. But that hasn't even happened, right? There hasn't been anyone who has said migrants ate their dog, right? When J.D. Vance has talked about this, he said he's getting emails and phone calls by people saying someone ate their neighbor's dog, or they've heard of someone whose dog was eaten. So this sort of, even you're sort of believing some of the most irreputable people, and none of them are even claiming that it happened to them. So this literally is just a completely fabricated story. He's imagined seeing someone on TV. I mean, maybe he's not talking about TV, maybe he's talking about TikTok, and it was some sort of parody that he watched. Who the hell knows, right? But it doesn't make him look good. Another issue that doesn't make Donald Trump look good is the false claim that he won the 2020 election.
If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter, because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact.
She's really like throwing back what sort of brought Biden down, the sort of standout line that Trump had against Biden, and says, I'm not sure what he just said there, and I don't think he knows either, right? And Harris now really making sure people understand that the more confused person on the stage now is not the Democratic candidate, it's the Republican one. Trump did have a comeback there. You know, she was saying all these world leaders are laughing at you. Donald Trump did think of one leader that likes him, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So not someone who's taken particularly seriously in international circles. Also, you know, fairly small country, a fairly small economy. If you're going to have this sort of international alliance, which is just Donald Trump and Hungary, I'm not sure how far you're going to get. Of course, false claims about stolen elections is where Trump is least in line with the American public. This is not an issue he wants to be talking about. He shouldn't be talking about it. You know, I'm happy he is, but if you're his campaign manager, you do not want him talking about it. When he talks about inflation, when he talks about immigration, not really when he talks about people eating dogs, but when he talks about illegal immigration in general, people might see him as on their side. But when he's motivating weirdos to storm the Capitol, less so. And when it comes to outing himself as a weirdo, Donald Trump's comments about Kamala Harris's race are up there with bleach injections or lectures about Hannibal Lecter. And recent comments about Harris came back to haunt him in last night's debate.
Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think it's, I mean, honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people.
Helena, we shouldn't probably overstate the significance of a debate. I mean, people thought that Hillary Clinton won the debate against Donald Trump, or won both of them, and he still won the presidency. But sort of with that caveat, I think this was a disaster for Trump, right? I mean, there was a clear attempt by Kamala Harris to get under his skin, and every single time he took the bait.
Well, there's a reason why the Tim Walz attacks in the previous weeks up until now about Republicans and Trump himself being very weird have hit so well. And we saw that throughout the entirety of the debate in the kind of subjects that Trump chose to talk about. And there's two main reasons for this. The first of all is the fact that all of these essentially Facebook memes that he turned into points in the debate, the kind of things that, that Kemi Badenoch would use in her political campaign videos, you'd think, things that they've just shared on social media, really good at playing to the base full of the Trump MAGA supporters that make up his supporter base that he plays to specifically, but it plays to basically nobody else and puts people off. And the reason why it puts people off very specifically is because where's the policy? There was no policy. This is why Kamala Harris was really good at saying, well, this person, he's saying things at his rallies about weird things that aren't in relationship to how you would engage in governance. But what's he talking about you, to your personal desires and your personal dreams and what you want to see in terms of government policy? In fact, he was specifically asked about policy over Obamacare. He was specifically asked on policy about Obamacare. And what he said was the genuine phrase, I don't have a plan yet, but I do have the concept of a plan. And if that's your approach to potentially looking at how you're going to implement policy as the leader of the free world, it's understandable that people who are either floating voters or on the other side of the aisle just refuse to take you seriously when actually, in actual fact, when he talks about things in terms of policy, he's saying things like, the Democrats want to give free transgender healthcare to illegal aliens in prison. And I'm like, this sounds like something that a leftist would make up as a meme to mock right-wingers about the kind of ridiculous portmanteaus of culture war slop that they just put together and then use that to try and smear or attack their opponents. And we can see that this playing to the base doesn't work electorally. Trump selected a load of candidates in the 2022 midterms that followed his lines, such as on the denial of the result of the 2020 election. People like Doug Mastriano, people like the candidate they chose in Nevada, for example, and basically every single one of these candidates, they all lost. It's not an electorally viable path for him to win over the independent voters that he needs to be able to keep on side if he wants a repeat of 2016. And clearly this is not going to work this time now that he is a well-known political figure.
The one about, what did you say? Illegal aliens, they're paying for them to have gender surgery in prisons. There was actually, there was a CNN piece that went super viral at the beginning of this week where Kamala Harris had, in 2019, responded to a survey questionnaire from the ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, I suppose. I'm sort of guessing what they stand for, but that's what it does. And one of their questions was about whether or not you as president would give people gender-affirming care in prisons and immigration detention centers. And she said yes. And then now this has become a talking point. Sort of another one of those situations where sort of her campaign in 2019 can come back to haunt her. But for her, Donald Trump just sounds completely insane when he says any of these things. So I don't think she should lose any sleep. The debate kept fact checkers busy. This was the most entertaining of them on the New York Times live blog. I love this one. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. So that's what former President Donald J. Trump said in the debate. And this is the NYT's fact check. Marxism refers to the political, social, and economic theory of Karl Marx, practiced as socialism or communism. Ms. Harris's campaign has described her as a capitalist. She has not proposed to seize the means of production. And she has received the backing of more than 80 chief executives, some of who have called her pro-business. I just love, she has not proposed to seize the means of production. Trump complained that the fact-checking on the ABC debate was biased against him. There might be a sliver of truth to that, but it is just a fact that Trump lies a lot more than your average politician. And after the debate, a Snap CNN poll with registered voters had Harris coming out on top. This is from CNN. Debate watchers said 63% to 37% that Harris turned in a better performance on stage in Philadelphia, so sort of 2/3 to a third. Prior to the debate, the same voters were evenly split on which candidate would perform more strongly, with 50% saying Harris would do so and 50% that Trump would. And afterwards, 96% of Harris supporters who tuned in said that their chosen candidate had done a better job, while a smaller 69% majority of Trump supporters credited him with having a better night. If there are 30% of Trump supporters who think he lost, I suppose there are lots of people say sort of no one can be persuaded not to vote Trump. Now, he does obviously have a hardcore who will stand by him whatever he does. If he stands in the middle of the road and shoots people, I think is what he said, right? They'll still support him. That's true. There obviously are a significant number of people who are undecided who will, decide the election. So it matters that only 69% of his supporters thought he did a good job. Trump, however, has since claimed that he won the debate by, quote, a lot, and that it was his best ever. And when asked if he'd debate Harris again, Trump said, quote, well, I'd be less inclined to because we had a great night. We won the debate. So he's saying we don't want to have another debate because we just did so goddamn well. Helena, will there be another debate? I assume sort of Trump losing means he's maybe not that likely to want to do it again.
I believe, if I remember correctly, is that if there was going to be a potential other debate, it would be on Fox News, I think was where Trump wanted to specifically have the debate. Now, he may end up getting pressured into it. It seems to be the done thing to have as many debates as you can, a few debates of this nature, especially since one of them was with Joe Biden, which is kind of irrelevant now. But you'd think that the Republican campaign team would want to avoid another debate at all costs after this one went. And I don't necessarily think that's because Kamala Harris necessarily performed spectacularly well. I mean, she was good at twisting the knife and getting Trump to have some ego death whilst mocking his personal politics. But she did spend most of this debate focusing on things that I thought Democrats had kind of shied away from, calling this man dangerous and talking about Project 2025 and saying you can't, you're being mocked all over the world because Trump is terrible. Because she was also kind of policy-like too. And when she was talking about policy, she was kind of being directed over on things like immigration policy and on fracking by like the right-wing narrative on these things, a very kind of Starmer approach to how you try and maintain some level of broad appeal in terms of swing voters in swing demographics, as well as praising the fact, well, Republicans are now on my side. What you're going to praise you having the support of Dick Cheney now, are you? I don't think that's a really good look considering his history of what it was like in government. So I think what they need to do is they need to be far more focused, if there is a future debate, specifically on all of the achievements that they have in government. Of course, the genocide in Gaza notwithstanding, things like the increase in employment due to their investment in the industries of the future, their investment into, say, for example, green transition, which has been a source of growth and a source of creation of jobs in places like there are House seats in Georgia, for example, that have gotten funding due to the Inflation Reduction Act. The biggest successes was the CHIPS Act, one of the biggest successes of the Democrats' last 4 years in government. The economy is stronger now than it was when they took over. And that's created jobs that Republican House members are now taking credit for. They need to turn it around at the next one. We all know that they can basically stand still and Trump will just kind of incinerate his own campaign with how strange and how weird and how kind of a little bit confused he is. But if they really want to actually push forward and engage with voters, it's going to have to try and move back from treating Trump as this kind of iconoclastic threat to democracy and start treating him really with the kind of contempt that he deserves, and actually try and build a campaign that's focused specifically, or a debate performance where they can impart saying, ignore this guy's weird stuff, or I guess rather than ignore it, just let that be what it is. But let's actually focus on what we're going to do for you and what we've done already, because they've been adhering to a full employment policy in terms of like monetary policy, running 7% deficits. Are they making the positive case as to why this macroeconomic policy is good? They're not doing that, and that's what they should be focusing on if there is another debate.
Another development last night, because if you're like me, you've probably been on the edge of your seat wondering this. Who is Taylor Swift going to endorse for president? Well, moments after the debate ended, we found out.
This was just posted online by a woman you might have heard of whose name is Taylor Swift. And she has posted this online along with a photo of her cat. And I'm going to read to you what she just posted. Quote, like many of you, I watched the debate tonight. If you haven't already, now is a great time to do your research on the issues at hand and the stances these candidates take on the topics that matter to you the most. As a voter, I make sure to watch and read everything I can about their proposed policies and plans for this country. Recently, I was made aware that AI of me, quote, me, falsely endorsing Donald Trump's presidential run was posted to his site. It really conjured up my fears around AI and the dangers of spreading misinformation. It brought me to the conclusion that I need to be very transparent about my actual plans for this election as a voter. The simplest way to combat misinformation is with the truth. And then she says, quote, I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because she fights for the rights and causes, I believe, need a warrior to champion them. I think she is a steady-handed, gifted leader, and I believe we can accomplish so much more in this country if we're led by calm and not chaos. I was so heartened and impressed by her selection of running mate Tim Walz, who has been standing up for LGBTQ plus rights, IVF, and a woman's right to her own body for decades. I've done my research and I've made my choice. Your research is all yours to do, and the choice is yours to make. I also want to say, especially to first-time voters, remember that in order to vote, you have to be registered. I also find it's much easier to vote early. I will link where to register and find early voting dates and info in my story. With love and hope, Taylor Swift, signed Childless Cat Lady.
Harris's VP pick, Tim Walz, was thrilled with that endorsement, which wasn't really too much of a surprise, given she backed Biden in 2020. Trump backer Elon Musk weighed in, though, with this skin-crawlingly creepy post. And it's really, really grotesque. So he said, "Fine, Taylor, you win. I will give you a child and guard your cats with my life." So this is a woman in the public eye, sort of one of the few people in the world who are as famous as Elon Musk, who has expressed a political opinion he has disagreed with. And he's said he will impregnate her. It's just so horrifically abusive. I mean, Elon Musk is just a despicable individual. And I think there's no better example of it than that tweet there. Of course, Trump himself took the endorsement about as well as you'd expect.
Well, I actually like Mrs. I actually like Mrs. Mahomes much better, if you want to know the truth. She's a big Trump fan. I was not a Taylor Swift fan. It was just a question of time. She couldn't. You couldn't possibly endorse Biden. You look at Biden, you couldn't possibly endorse him. But she's a very liberal person. She seems to always endorse a Democrat, and she'll probably pay a price for it at the in the marketplace. But no, I like Brittany. I think Brittany's great. Brittany got a lot of news last week. She's a big MAGA fan. That's the one I like much better than Taylor Swift.
I hope Brittany's not a MAGA fan. That was news to me if so. Your comments on Taylor Swift's endorsement. I mean, I suppose she is the most popular musician in the United States right now. I would imagine most of her supporters would already be backing the Democrats anyway, although I suppose maybe that is up for debate. Or what do you think about this?
I think that her supporter base probably lends themselves to the Democratic Party's political platform pretty highly. But I think what's important about this, usually celebrity endorsements aren't particularly important in politics, especially nowadays when in the kind of post-2000s world, we tend to hold celebrities far more in contempt than we do in adoration, maybe more so in the UK than we do in the US, but they've never usually been a big pull when it comes to deciding how people come to vote in an election, who's my favorite celebrity endorsed. But when it comes to Taylor Swift, she's so massive. She commands such an ardent and such a dedicated fan base, and her reach is so widespread that maybe it's not going to pull people who previously were conservative into voting Democrat. I don't think that's true. But what she does do is play to undecided voters or people who are not politically engaged. That's what she really gives the Democratic ticket. If she's out there making huge posts on Instagram, we're seeing tens of millions of views, loads of people are interacting with it and seeing her political position on this. Because it wasn't just a small thing saying, go Harris votes. It was, these are all the reasons why I am backing them. I need to register for early voting. I need to go and register to vote and find out to make sure that I have everything I need to be able to go and cast my vote. It's something that you can, as a celebrity influencer, you engage people who otherwise wouldn't be paying attention, who are outside of the political class. And most people tend to spend a lot of time in politics hunting for winning over votes from the other side, looking for the switch voters. There is plenty of political capital to be gained by trying to go after the politically disengaged or the politically people who weren't relevant to politics previously, people who were blissfully unaware. And it may come down to it that they don't even get further engaged. They just go, well, I voted because I saw a post which Taylor Swift said that it would be a good thing to go and vote, and so I voted for who she recommended to do so. People mostly make votes based on the recommendations of other people a lot of the time, rather than having this kind of firebrand support for a specific political party. So I don't think it's going to have like a massive influence. It's certainly not nothing. It's certainly relevant in terms of getting people to quote unquote Pokemon Go to the polls, which might previously not have done.
So I was just looking at, she's got 283 million followers on Instagram, which compares to Elon Musk's 197 million followers on X. I imagine probably Taylor Swift has. Well, Elon Musk has definitely got a group of super fans, but I think they tend to be quite a select group of people. He clearly has actually influenced sort of rich tech people in California to make them more Trumpist. Of course, there aren't many swing voters no swing voters in California by definition. Taylor Swift maybe, has some more supporters in those places that will make the difference in the presidential election. Before we move on, if you like our coverage, consider supporting our journalism. We're entirely funded by our audience. You can go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is, of course, in the description. The Labour Party has today introduced a bill to Parliament to end no-fault evictions, which they say could be banned as soon as next summer. The Renters' Rights Bill will also ban blanket bans on renting to people with children and people on benefits, and it will tackle bidding wars in the private rental sector by banning estate agents from accepting offers above the listed asking price. Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook spoke to BBC Breakfast about the plans.
We are going to fundamentally overhaul the regulation of the private rented sector, and we are going to level decisively the playing field between landlord and tenants, ending the insecurity and injustice that many tenants face. And as you'll know, most of them live day in, day out with the knowledge that they could be uprooted, kicked out of their homes with little notice, minimal justification. A significant minority live in extremely substandard accommodation for fear that a complaint will lead to a retaliatory eviction. It is beyond time that we deal with this. We are going to do that through the bill. We're also going to ensure that it works for good landlords. We recognise that most landlords out there provide a good service to their tenants. They will have robust grounds for possession in cases where it is legitimate, but we're going to end arbitrary evictions, and we're going to put in place better protections for renters, including the growing number of older people who rent privately, against unreasonable within-tenancy rent hikes, because we know that rent pressures over recent years have been a big factor in that strain on household budgets.
For more on the Renters' Rights Bill, I spoke earlier to Dan Wilson-Craw, Deputy Director of Generation Rent.
We've been campaigning for the best part of a decade. The abolition of Section 21 is a central step towards a fairer rental market. And then we've also got within this bill, Register of Landlords measures to just improve the quality of private rented homes as well. So this is a culmination of years of campaigning by Generation Rent and others within the renters movement. So it's a huge day. We've had a huge day like this under the previous government as well, but it's very positive.
It was the Renters Reform Bill, wasn't it, when it was the Conservatives putting it forward? Now it's the Renters' Rights Bill. Is there any difference, or is this sort of just Labour finishing what Michael Gove started?
It is broadly similar. We're still looking through the bill to work out exactly what the improvements are, where maybe we still need work to the bill. One of the main things is bidding wars. This is something that Labour came out strongly against in the election campaign. And it's something we've seen a lot more of in the past couple of years. Labour's set out plans within the bill to outlaw bidding wars, to make sure that landlords and letting agents can not only not ask tenants to bid higher than the advertised price, but they can't actually accept more than the advertised price as well, which I think is positive. It'll hopefully save tenants a lot of wasted time when you're viewing a property. You're asked, you think you can afford it, but then suddenly you get asked to pay off more than you can actually afford. And so you just have to walk away. The other one is extending our ABS law to the private sector. So landlords will have timescales that they have to now meet in order to resolve unsafe conditions within the home.
So it's been broadly welcomed by Generation Rent, your organisation. The landlord lobby isn't quite as pleased. They've been making some complaints today. The first claim being made by landlords is that they may need to raise rents in response to the Renters' Rights Bill. The Landlords Association says this is because Labour's new bill would allow tenants to move out just 2 months after moving into a home. So currently the minimum period is usually 6 months to a year. So if you sort of sign a contract, you're expected to stay there for a while. They're saying you could leave after 2 months, and landlords will have to sort of make up for that by charging more rent. We can go to actually a quote from someone from the Landlords Association. This is Chris Norris, their policy director. He says the new model could lead to Airbnb Lite. If you need a place for 2 months, you could go to a private rented sector landlord, sign a tenancy agreement, and then immediately serve notice. That's why he's saying they might have to increase rents to sort of, I suppose, hedge against people moving after 2 months. Let's also listen to the director of the Landlords Association. He was on Radio 4 this morning, where he was asked about the possibility of regulating rent increases.
There's also a call with this bill for the limit to rent increases in tenancies. Otherwise, there's a fear that unaffordable rent rises will become another form of no-fault evictions. As the CEO of the National Residential Landlords Association, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, tenants can already challenge unfair rent increases through the first-tier tribunal, so this isn't anything new. I guess perhaps renters don't know that this exists or their rights on this. I have no issue with tenants having access to justice, but the thing is, the fewer homes that you have, the more demand that you have. We have, on average, 17 tenants applying to rent one property. And so until we actually deal with the core issue of a lack of supply in the sector, that's not going to get better through these changes. In some respects, it may well get worse because it may force good landlords out of the sector. So,
Dan, we've got a couple of objections. How would you respond to those?
This Airbnb thing is really implausible, to be honest. If you're looking for a short-term let, you could go through Airbnb or a similar platform. If you're starting a tenancy, you have to get a reference from your previous landlord. You have to get a reference from your employer. No one's going to do that to get a short-term let. So yeah, for that reason, I think it's pretty implausible. And we've had a similar system in Scotland for a number of years now, and we've heard nothing like this happening there. So yeah, this isn't something we're concerned about. I mean, where we'd agree with Ben Beadle is that this isn't going to change issues around affordability in the rental market. So we do need other measures to reduce rents and make rents more affordable. I don't think it's likely to push so-called good landlords out of the market. If you're a landlord and you're not currently abusing Section 21 and you are making sure that your home is safe to live in, then you're not going to be affected by this law because you're already doing the bare minimum that we should expect from landlords.
The complaint lots of people have with renting is not just that it's insecure, which it seems like this bill is going to deal with, somewhat effectively, but also that it's very expensive. And as far as I understand, Labour aren't really suggesting anything in this bill that would bring down rents. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So in the clip a moment ago, they were talking about this tribunal, which would be available for tenants to access if a rent is unreasonable. I think in the government's phraseology, what we'd say is you need to be able to challenge rents that are unaffordable, rent increases that are unaffordable. So by which we mean rents that are rising faster than your wages are rising, let's say. Unfortunately, the way the tribunal is set up, and I don't believe there's much to really change that, the way the tribunal does work, is that if you challenge your rent increase through that, they'll just look at whatever the market rent on a new tenancy is out in Zoopla or Rightmove listings, and say that the landlord can charge you that rent. Which I think for a lot of people, particularly in the last couple of years, would be unaffordable and could, in a lot of cases, push people to move out.
Israel has attacked a school in central Gaza, killing at least 14 Palestinians sheltering in the UN building. 2 UNRWA employees and several children are reportedly amongst those killed. This is the 5th time that the Al-Juni school has come under Israeli attack after becoming a shelter for Palestinians displaced by the war. Located in the built-up Nusrat refugee camp, the Gazan civil defense say they are still recovering bodies from the site of the attack. The death toll at Nusrat brings the total of Palestinians killed by Israel in the last 24 hours to at least 45 people. Worryingly, the IDF also appears to be targeting whole families. In Khan Yunis, an airstrike on a residential building has killed 13 people. All were reportedly members of a single family, the Al-Karaz, and 8 of them were children. In the Burej refugee camp in central Gaza, the home of the Abu Sadeh family was also hit by an Israeli missile, killing a young girl and injuring 5 others. The Al-Najjar family also appeared to have been targeted in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. According to reports, 6 people were killed. They included 2 children and their parents. The targeting of entire Palestinian families has been a running theme of Israel's war on Gaza. By June this year, at least 60 families in Palestine had lost 25 or more family members to Israeli bombs. A quarter of them had seen 50 or more family members killed. The deliberate killing of families across multiple generations is a key part of South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. But it's not just Palestinian families that are being targeted by Israel. Aid workers delivering essential polio vaccines have come under fire too. Last month, polio re-emerged in Gaza after having been eradicated in the area a quarter of a century ago. And after a 10-month-old boy was paralyzed by the virus, Israel agreed to hold brief pauses in its assault to allow the UN to vaccinate the enclave's 640,000 surviving children. But on Monday, a UN convoy carrying 12 staff to support the polio vaccination rollout in northern Gaza was detained and attacked by Israeli forces. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric described what happened.
The situation escalated very quickly, with soldiers pointing their weapons directly towards our personnel in the convoy. The UN vehicles were encircled by Israeli forces and shots were fired. The convoy was then approached by IDF tanks and a bulldozer, which proceeded to ram the UN vehicles from the front and from the back, compacting the convoy with the UN staff inside. One bulldozer dropped debris on the first vehicle, while Israeli soldiers threatened staff, making it impossible for them to safely exit the vehicles.
2 of those UN staff members were taken for interrogation and held for 7.5 hours. Dujarric went on to describe the attack as, quote, the latest example of the unacceptable dangers and impediment that humanitarian personnel in Gaza are experiencing. Now, Israel has also been accused of violating the vaccination pauses by bombing in areas near to roll out centres. Euromed Human Rights Monitor say that suggests a deliberate strategy to obstruct the polio vaccination campaign. Naturally, people will be more wary of taking their kids to areas where Israel has bombed nearby. But even before the polio outbreak, experts argued that Israel was deliberately promoting disease in Gaza. Obviously, it's common for diseases to spread more rapidly in war zones, but Israel's systematic destruction of hospitals and sanitation infrastructure is unprecedented. And some Israelis have even said it out loud last year. This was retired IDF Major General Giora Island, who wrote this. The international community warns us of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this, as difficult as that may be. After all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer. Now, I remember sort of reporting on this statement at the time, so in November last year, sort of saying that this is the sort of genocidal language that's coming from senior Israeli politicians. Well, now this seems to be the genocidal action which is following. Targeting whole Palestinian families, blocking the rollout of essential vaccinations. These are, by anyone's definition, war crimes. And earlier this month, the UK finally suspended 30 weapons export licenses to Israel because of the risk that British arms would be used to break international humanitarian law. 320 arms licenses remain untouched by the ban, leading Amnesty to call it gesture politics. But it turns out even that was too much for the United States. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken last month lobbied British Foreign Secretary David Lammy over that partial ban, according to Politico. Blinken asked Lammy what it would take for the UK to reconsider the weapons suspension. Lammy reportedly told Blinken that the suspension would only be reversed by a ceasefire in Gaza and access by international human rights organizations to Palestinians in Israeli prisons. Of course, that partial weapons ban doesn't go nearly far enough. At the TUC Congress in Brighton, delegates have been voting on a motion calling on the government to ban all arms sales to Israel. This was Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zomlot, making the case for a full embargo.
While we welcome the decision by the UK government to suspend some arms licenses to Israel, it is simply unconscionable that the UK should continue to deliver any arms to Israel, given what it is clear to everyone, including according to UK lawyers, to be a grave violation of international law. This is a legal obligation, domestically and internationally.
That motion has now been passed by TUC delegates. Now, it's interesting, sort of an interview we showed you yesterday with Dave Ward from the CWU and my colleague Polly Smythe ended with a question about Palestine. I thought Dave Ward's answer was really interesting. He was sort of talking about how, this issue, they want to be campaigning on it, but it does pose a challenge because they do have to bring their members along with them. He said some of their members think, why are we campaigning on Palestine? I want you to be campaigning on my working conditions. Others who are not sure where they stand on the conflict, but obviously the TUC has now said loud and clear that we want a much stronger position from the UK government when it comes to holding Israel to account, and suspending 30 arms licenses out of 330 isn't that.
When it comes to the TUC motion, I find it very interesting that we've seen lots of groups now who've been essentially making really kind of strong statements in terms of trying to force the hand of the government in trying to change its position. Of course, we saw at the Green Party conference them passing a motion, not just obviously, I think it was reported specifically on the idea of them referring to Israel's actions as genocidal, but also the explicit condemnations of all arms sales and indeed condemnation of diplomatic relations with an apartheid state. So there's been very strong condemnation from the Green Party. And now for the TUC passing this motion wanting all arms licenses to be banned. And on top of that, we've seen a lot of pressure from the government, from the Liberal Democrats. Their Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Layla Moran, is obviously of Palestinian descent. And she's been very forceful in trying to hold the government to account over its relationships with Israel during the conflict in Gaza too. So given that the movement has been very small, there's been a very small movement by David Lammy over how we are changing our relationship by suspending fewer than 10% of the arms licenses we currently have on very kind of nebulous grounds of them being potentially offensive rather than defensive, which to me seems completely nonsensical. Either you think that they are violating IHL or you don't think they are. So this minute measure doesn't really seem that much to me. Funnily enough, that very small measure was still enough to get Antony Blinken mad. And props to David Lammy, his answer was correct. Like, they have to stop the conflict. If they keep doing the conflict, then they're going to keep committing the same kind of war crimes, which has led us to take this legal decision to halt some arms licenses. Whilst his approach to essentially standing up to American foreign policy in this one is to be lauded, that is, again, only within the context of not actually doing what is fundamentally should be done, which is suspending all arms licenses whilst what is being carried out is being carried out. Because as we've seen, what is being carried out, according to what you can intuit from the statements that have been made, are such things as you said, targeting aid workers, whether it be food aid workers, or in this case, those trying to administer life-saving vaccines. And this admission by this retired IDF person around, well, actually, this can't be avoided, the idea that there might be a smaller population in Gaza if these epidemics start to spread. And well, of course, any kind of way they're going to have plausible deniability by saying, we've had this humanitarian pauses to try and get these vaccinations done. How dare you try and hold our feet to the fire over this while simultaneously striking those aid workers, is a way of being able to try and soft engineering the conditions with which Palestinians will be more likely to vacate the territory or be taken in as refugees elsewhere, such that, again, under the current administration's stated goals, which is Israeli sovereignty between the river and the sea. So definitely the warning signs are being shown in the loosest of terms over Israel's conduct with regards to these vaccination pauses that we've seen, and we can't really take everything at face value.
We've raced through our stories today, Helena, so we're going to wrap up ever so slightly early. Thank you so much for joining me again this evening. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. The Dream Team back again 2 days in a row. Take care, everyone. Have a nice evening.
I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you everyone for watching tonight. Do come back for our show tomorrow from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.